Now this king and this queen ruled this kingdom in a way that was just beautiful. It was a small kingdom, but they knew everybody in the kingdom. They knew all of the innkeepers, they knew all of the storekeepers, they knew the farmers, they knew the students, they knew the children, they knew everybody. And everybody in the kingdom loved them. They knew not only the people, but they knew the land too. There wasn't a well that they didn't know. There wasn't a cave that they hadn't explored. There wasn't a forest or a great tree that they hadn't climbed when they were younger. They were so intrinsically involved with their kingdoms, with their kingdom, it was a beautiful thing. And so you would think when the king and the queen are so invested in the land that they rule, that things would go really well. And things were really pretty good. But the king and the queen had a secret that gnawed at them every night when they took off their royal crowns and unfastened their royal cloaks and retired to their bedchamber. And the great grief that was between them was that they could not conceive a child. And so with this lack of fertility right at the heart of the kingdom between the king and the queen, things grew, but they didn't really flourish. And like any great secret, everybody in the kingdom knew about it. And so the king and the queen just continued as best they could. Now, the king's sister had many children. And one day she went to the king and she said, I have a lot of sons and daughters, and I think it would be so nice if you were able to take one of them. It'd be so lovely to have a little child running around in the halls of the castle. It'd be so nice to have another person sitting at your table. It would be so nice for you to be able to bestow gifts during birthdays and holidays. It'd just be so nice to have the sound of a child in the castle. And the king thought about it for about a second and a half and said, yeah, that's perfect, that's great, we would love that. And so his sister brought a little girl, and the little girl lived the life of a princess in the castle. And she was fantastic. She ran up and down the halls. She could go anywhere. She ran down into the wine cellar. She ran out into the garden. She ran up to the servants' quarters. She could go anywhere in the castle that she wanted to, the whole grounds. And she was a joyous, beautiful, bubbly little girl, and everybody loved her. The king and queen loved her deeply. Now the king had given her a golden ball, and the little girl loved nothing more than to go and play with the golden ball in the garden of the castle. Now the garden of the castle was big and it was beautifully manicured, but it was on the edge of this great forest, which was very much not manicured. And so the little girl loved to go to the edge of the forest, right on the edge there, and play with her golden ball. She would just throw it up and catch it, and throw it up and catch it, and throw it really high and catch it, and throw it really low and catch it. She spent hours playing with the golden ball. One eye on the forest, one eye on the ball, all the time. And days went by, weeks went by, months went by, and this happened. But one day, one eye on the forest saw another little girl looking back at her. About the same age, about the same height, about the same build, but really different. This little girl was wild. Her hair was all askew with. She had like bits of twigs sticking out of it. Her clothes were a little bit raggy, a little bit dirty, a little bit Puerto Viejo-ish. And she was standing there watching. And the little girl caught her ball and she looked at the wild little child, and the little wild child looked back at her, and the little wild child said to her, "Give me your ball." And the princess looked at her and looked at the ball. She loved that ball, but she hadn't really played with a little girl her own age she couldn't remember since the last time. And so she looked at the ball and she threw it to the little girl, and the little girl caught it. The little girl was looking at the ball, feeling it. Yeah, it was gold. It was pretty heavy. Feeling it, thinking to herself, wow, this is a golden ball. This is a golden ball. I'm right by the forest. I could just turn around and I could just go into the forest with this. This is worth a lot of money, this ball. And then she looked up at the little girl, the little princess, and thought, yeah, but I haven't played with a little girl my age for so long. And so she threw the ball back. And the ball bounced back and forth between the little wild child and the little palace child. Now it was getting near the end of the day, and it was time for the little princess to go in and have supper. And so as a great bell sounded, and the little girl said to the wild child, "Why don't you come in and have supper with me? I'm sure my aunt and uncle won't mind. They've got tons of food. There's so much food in the castle. Come on, let's go." And so the little wild child went in. No, the queen was a Virgo. I can say that because I'm a Virgo. Queen was a Virgo, and she liked everything just so. She had all of her copies of National Geographic. You can't arrange them by color, so they were arranged by date. That was great. And she had all of the cables for all of her devices color-coded with the device. She had a nice biodegradable cover for each of them, and it matched the cable. Everything was just so. She had different sets of cutlery for each day because they had a lot of cutlery in the castle, and she liked to be well organized. So when her little princess stepdaughter or daughter came in with this little wild ragamuffin behind her, she was a little bit surprised. And she pulled the daughter to the side and she said, "Who is this? What have you done here? Who is this? You never, you know that Thursdays are my day, and you've brought some. Who is?" And the little princess said, "Yeah, but we were playing, and she was so much fun, and she said that she has a grandmother, and the grandmother can help you with your problem. And I just thought that we have a lot of food, and so I brought her in. I thought it would be okay. Are we cool?" And the queen said, "What problem? What problem do I have? What do you know?" And the little girl said, I don't know anything. I just brought it, and she's friendly. She's really sweet. She wouldn't eat much. She's small." So the queen said, "Okay," beckoned the little girl over, and she said, "What problem do I have that your grandmother can help me with?" And the little girl looked at this queen, beautiful woman, and her eyes got really big, and she said, "I don't know. I listen to my family. They talk all the time. They never stop talking, and one of the things they talk about is, how they could help you if you only asked them." And the queen became curious. She loved this little daughter of hers, but she wanted her own. And so she said to the little girl, "Okay, all right, you can stay for dinner, but I'm prepared to entertain the idea that your grandmother could help me in something. And so why don't you call for her?" And the little wild child went to the window, threw open the shutters. I can't whistle. Loudly, three times. And there was like a noise from the forest. It was suddenly like all of those vultures that we see in the morning, like they all took off at once, making a huge ruckus. There was a great big rumbling and grumbling in the forest, and then this little old lady appears from out behind the trees. And she's a little old lady, she walks, she's got a stick, she's got a bit of a limp on this leg, this hip obviously is bothering her, and she kind of like very slowly takes her time coming up, always one eye on the window where her little granddaughter is, coming up very, very slowly. It took a long while. The first course was done, the second course was done, they were on to the desserts, and finally the little old lady gets in, and she's standing there, and she said, "Why did you call me?" That's not a very good accent. She said, "Why did you call me?" I'll never be able to get that right again. And the little wild girl said, "This is the queen, and I was telling her that you could help her." And the old woman said, No, I can't help her. I can't help her. I'm going back to the forest." But she was going pretty slowly. "I'm going back to the forest." The queen is looking at the little wild child and says, "You know what?" And the little wild child says, "Give her some brandy. She loves brandy. You must have brandy here. If you give her some brandy, I guarantee that she'll stay." And so the queen looks at the king, and the king is, he's scrolling on his phone. He doesn't want to be bothered by what the queen's going to ask him. He doesn't want to even hear it. He's scrolling down, he's looking up for a playlist for some nice after dinner music that will drown the queen out. And he's pretending he doesn't hear it. And the queen says to him, "Go get that brandy. Get your best brandy. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who gave it to you." And he was like, "Yeah, but Che Guevara gave me that brandy a long time ago. I really don't want to part with it. Che, I'm never going to meet. Che's gone. He's gone." She's like, "Get that brandy." And so the old king, no, he's not old, he went over and he very carefully opened his medicine cabinet, which was his drinks cabinet, and he takes out this old bottle. It's all in Spanish, and it wasn't really brandy, it was rum. And he went over and he poured a little bit for the old lady. Now the old lady moved really quickly. She was right at his side, and she tipped his elbow just as he was pouring it. And as he was pouring it, and as she tipped an elbow, she also took a very large bottle out of her cloak and stuck it underneath the brandy. And so there was about this much brandy in that cup. And she puts it to her, "Oh, thank you," puts it to her lips and starts drinking it. Now, it was a really good brandy. And so she's getting to be a little bit tipsy, just a little bit tipsy. and she starts maybe swaying back a little bit back and forth, and she was like, oh yeah, I remember Che. There's a little bit of movement in her hips. That old hip that was causing her so much trouble coming into the castle, that's problem's gone now. She's got a little bit more sway in her hips. And she was like, yeah, but I can't help you. I've got to go. And she starts heading out the door. The little wild child says to the queen, okay, all right, okay, there's one last thing. She loves cigars. Give her a cigar. Now the king looks at the queen and says to her, yeah, you've got those cigars. Who was it that gave you those cigars? Who was it now? Somebody really famous, wasn't it? And she was like, no, I don't have any cigars. And he was like, yeah, you've got cigars. I remember that because I never got invited to that party. You've got cigars, give her a cigar. And so the queen ended up going to her casket, opening it, taking out a cigar. The old lady comes over, takes a cigar, and then grabs another handful, sticks them in her pocket, lights up the cigar, and somehow she's got hold of that brandy again. And so now she's doing this little cigar and brandy dance, and she's pretty happy. She's walking around the great stateroom that they were eating in. She has this huge cloak on with many pockets. She's putting candlesticks in it. She's opening drawers. She's picking up golden cutlery. She's putting them in there as well. You know, she's got her cigar and she's like, yeah, this is pretty good. She's having a right little party to herself. And finally, the queen has had enough and she's like, okay, can you just tell me what it is that you have to tell me? It's getting late. Women's Hour Oprah is coming on and I need to be there to hear her. So it's getting late. So the old lady goes to the window and looks out of the window, and there's a big tower outside. And on top of the tower there's a room, and that's where the king and the queen sleep. She's looking up there and she was like, is that where you sleep? You sleep all the way up on top of that tower? The queen says, yeah. And she's like, oh, this is easier than I thought. And king, is that where you sleep? You sleep with your wife up way, way, way up on top of that tower? And the king says, yeah, obviously I sleep with my wife on top of the tower. Yeah, that's our bedroom. And she was, all right, okay. There's no way that any egg can be fertile that high up. You need to have connection with the ground. You need to be right on the ground. And king, there's just, nothing's happening up there with you down there. That down there and up there doesn't work. You need to be on the ground. I'm going to tell you what to do. There's an old stable at the back of the garden. It has a dirt floor. I want you to take your royal bed and put your royal bed in that stable on that dirt floor. But first of all, queen, you've got to have a bath. You've got to have a bath like you've never had a bath before. You've got to have the right music, maybe Sinead O'Connor, maybe something like that, something very nice. You've got to have candles. You've got to have the good candles from Bed Bath & Beyond, not your crappy Chinese store candles. You've got to have some bubble bath, really good bubble bath. You've got to have some wine, your favorite wine. You've got to have a bath, not the bath that you have every week, but you know that self-care bath that you always talk about and you never do? You've got to have that bath. When you're finished with the bath, take your bath water, get one of your servants, take the bath water down, pour it on the ground underneath where you're going to put your bed. The bed's going to go on top. You and the king are going to go to bed. He's going to work like he's never worked before. He's going to work all night. And in the morning, you're going to move that bed. And underneath that bed, growing up out of where you put your bath water, there's going to be two flowers. There's going to be a white flower that's beautiful, fragrant, just gleaming with health and vitality. Absolutely stunning, a flower like you've never seen before, so pure, so delicate, so innocent, so beautiful. And there's going to be a red flower. Don't touch the red flower. Whatever you do, just ignore that red flower. You're going to eat the white flower. And if things go well, you'll find yourself a child. And with that, she gathered all of the goblets, silver and gold, that were on the sideboard, and started hobbling out of the room. So the king and the queen looked at each other and thought, well, what else are we going to do? We might as well try it. We've tried everything else. We've tried the moon, we've tried the stars, we've tried, acupuncture, we've tried shamanism, we've tried cleansing our chakras, we've tried yoga, nothing's happened, nothing's worked. Let's just do what she says. And so they did. And sure enough, the next morning, the queen jumped up out of the bed, pushed it to the side, and there, as the old woman had described, were two flowers. One of them, beautiful, delicate, slender stalk, with this exquisitely shaped white flower on top. Just perfect. This perfume coming from it was absolutely intense, intoxicating, amazing. And there was a red flower, putrid, stinky, oozing this yellow coloured pus stuff. Flies already buzzing around it. And the queen reached down to pick the white flower. Now, we've all made this mistake before, and we continue to make this mistake in our lives. Just as the queen was reaching down to pick up the white flower, she suddenly found herself on all fours, her mouth on top of that red flower, guzzling it like it was a hot dog at a Coney Island stand, chomping and chomping and chomping down on that flower, and singing to herself or screaming to herself, "I feel so alive! I feel so alive!" The flower was gone. And finally she looked up at her husband. Her husband, who was exhausted. He was sitting in bed, just like this, because he was tired. And he was wide awake, and he had seen his wife do stuff like this before. And so he knew that the best thing to do was just pretend that he hadn't seen it. And so, you know, he's scrolling, there's nothing, his phone's not even on, he hadn't left it charging the night before. So there's nothing going on with his phone, but he's sitting there, lying there, scrolling through it, pretending to scroll through it. And he said, did you see the white flower? And the queen said, "You will tell no one of this. You will never speak of this to a single living soul." And the king said, "Well, I don't know what to speak of. All you need to do is eat the white flower, dear. You just need to eat the white flower. There's only one flower there, right? Just eat it. We'll be done. We can go home. We can pack up this bed." So the queen did. She ate the white flower, and sure enough, 9 months later, she found herself in a room ready to give birth. Now, at that time, it was only women that were allowed in the birthing room. And she had everybody in there. She had her best friends, she had the girls from the yoga class, she had several doulas, she had her sisters, she had her nieces, and she had her aunt, she had her mother. Everybody was there. And also there was a little tiny doula. A little tiny doula. So tiny, in fact, that they'd taken her out of a matchbox about an hour before the birth was to start. And this little tiny doula was used very specifically for one thing in births. Because this little tiny doula could see into places that other people couldn't see. And so there she was, standing on top of a stool, right in front of the queen. The queen is lying in the birth position, ready to go, and the little doula is standing right there, almost like wearing a catcher's mitt. She's standing right there. And she's looking into the scrying bowl of the queen's vagina. "Oh yes! Oh yes, there's something coming. I see something coming." She was related to the old woman in the woods, that's why the accent is the same. "There's something coming, I think. Oh, but wait a minute. Wait a minute. Okay, get out the way!" And the queen little doula jumped off and ran to the side. And just as she had done that, from out of the queen's vagina came a little girl riding a goat, waving a spoon. Now that little girl on the goat, waving the spoon, rode round and round and round the room 3 times, ended up in a corner, waving her spoon, pulling her goat and shouting, "Meat! Bring me meat!" Now, it's a true thing that when we are born, we're born with a wild twin. And because we're born in a society that doesn't really care or is afraid of wild twins, those wild twins are often discarded. And most of our time and the rest of our life is searching for that wild twin. The queen looked up, looked into the corner, and immediately thought, "Fucking red flower." But the little girl waved her spoon again, and she said, don't worry, the one you're waiting for will be here in about 5 seconds. Just keep doing what you're doing, I'll be fine. And the queen, realizing what she had done, said, "Okay, this is my daughter. Somebody bring her meat, whatever meat she needs, some barbecue or something, and brings some hay for the goat. The servants went off, they came back, and the little girl in the corner, sitting on her goat, munching on ribs, feeding hay to the goat. Her little wooden spoon tucked under her arm, and she was wearing a little cloak that was half covering her face, a little tattered cloak. And from that moment on, she was known as Tatterhood. So Tatterhood is sitting there, eating on her ribs. And just as she had said, just as she had foretold, the queen is delivered of this beautiful little baby. Perfect. Has 10 fingers, has 10 toes, has little rosy cheeks, has a little pouting lips. Beautiful. Perfect. So Tatterhood and her sister grew up in the castle, and they were inseparable. Everywhere where the princess went, the second daughter, Tatterhood went too. And really anywhere where Tatterhood went, everybody went, because she was great. She was funny, she was intelligent, she was a little crazy, she was ridiculous. Nobody knew what she was going to do next, but they knew that it was going to be fun. And so the two sisters were inseparable. Life was great. The king and the queen were super happy. The whole kingdom was abundant. It was flourishing. It was perfect. It was about as wholesome as it could possibly be. Now, on the evening of the girl's 15th birthday, maybe a bit later because this is a Scandinavian story, but on the eve of their 15th birthday, the king was throwing a huge party, and he was inviting all the young men, all the men in the neighboring kingdoms to introduce his daughters. But he wasn't happy. He was in his room sharpening his sword, and as he was sharpening it, he was singing this little song that went very simply. It just had one line: nobody is fit enough for my daughter. Nobody is good enough for my daughter. Nobody is right enough for my daughter. Upstairs in the girls' rooms, the second born is parading around in front of her mirror, full-length mirror, and she was trying on dress after dress after dress. She was really excited. Tatterhood is sitting there again in the corner. Tatterhood liked corners. She's sitting in the corner with a goat, with her spoon, saying to her sister, it doesn't make any difference. They're all the same. Just pick one of them, get it over and done with. It's all the same. It doesn't make any difference at all. Just listen to me. And their younger sister is going, oh, but you don't know. You've never, what do you think about this dress? You think the color goes in the eyes? Now there was a noise outside. And the noise was a little bit like this. So of course the girls were surprised. And Tatterhood went to the door, went to the window and opened the shutters. And she said, shit. I thought this might happen. Outside, coming from all directions, was a horde of people that had not been invited to the party. We must always be careful who we don't invite to the parties, because there's always a repercussion. So this horde that were coming were ogres and giants and warlocks and those bad witches, and they were vampires and zombies and those bad people in Pokemon, and whoever you're scared of, they were there. They were coming, pouring out of the forest, pouring over the walls of the castle gardens and amassing right in front of the castle. Now that noise had been heard throughout the castle, and several of the young men down in the great hall had peered out of the window and thought, oh right, okay, and they suddenly had to check their phones too. And so when Tatterhood decided that these were her people, she was going to go out and deal with them. She was going to go out and have a word or two with these people that came up. She understood them. She was going to go see to them. When she rode down the castle steps on her goat and through all of these shining, bright young men and old men that had come to meet the princess, not one of them offered to help her. But Tatterhood didn't really care. The goat reared up, smashed open the walls, the gates of the palace, and out she rode. And once outside, she was marvelous to watch. With her spoon held aloft, she was hitting this one and that one. The goat was kicking this one and that one. The goat was also biting this one and this one. And one by one, that host, those ogres and giants and witches and warlocks and mean people and all sorts of things that I'm not going to say, they all started fleeing and running back. Now the princess, her sister, was watching from the window, And the last one to go was an old hag woman. She saw the princess's head poking out from the window. And just like Michael Jackson or LeBron or somebody like that, she ran up the side of the building, just ran right up the side of the building, got a hold of the princess's head and snapped it straight up. Now she happened to be carrying around a calf's head in her pocket. She whipped out the calf's head, put it on the sister's shoulders, cackled like a son of a gun, and disappeared into the forest. So Tatterhood went back in, and everything seemed fine. You know, she was really pretty pleased with herself. She didn't know that she could do it, but she'd done it, and she was really in a good mood. She went up to her sister. She ignored all those guys downstairs. Her dad was still sharpening his sword. He had his earphones in. He hadn't understood anything that had happened. She went up, and she walked into the room, or she rode into the room, and there was the sister wearing the cow's head. Ah, shit. Alright, okay. We can fix this, don't worry. But actually, like this, you're much safer than you were before. The next day, at breakfast, the goat was eating hay. The sister was eating hay too, chewing the cud, the first time ever. It was really fun. She was enjoying it. And Tatterhood said to her father, I know who that was. I visited that woman's house before. I know where she lives. I can get the head back. We can do this change again, and then you can have your party, and we can just go on. And so the father gave her what she asked for. He gave her a ship. They got into the ship. The sister, Tatterhood, the goat, obviously, and enough men to keep the ship going, and enough provisions. And they set sail. For 9 long days they went along a loch, or a fjord. And then they took out that boat and they hauled it for 9 more days over land. Till they came to the next fjord, put it in, 9 more days. So it was a long time they were going. Finally, on that 27th day, they came to the lonely, lonely end of the fjord. And there, nestling against the mountains, was a hut. And out of the hut came boom, 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 noise of a heavy bass. And Tatterhood said, yeah, this is it. This is the house, I remember. Lying around outside of the house was all sorts of detritus. There was spent bodies everywhere. There was empty crates of beer. There was empty barrels. There was a distillery, a little still bubbling away in the background somewhere with some old lady doing her magic. It was early in the morning, perfect time to be breaking into a house like this. And so Tatterhood went up to the door, peered through the window, and there, hanging on a hook on the back of the door, was her sister's head. Her sister's eyes were wide open. She had seen a hell of a lot in those 27 days. There was 3 white strands of hair in her head, as a testimony to all of those things that she had seen and experienced. Tatterhood very, very carefully took the head off of the hook and very quietly started going back out. It was only when they got to the ship and Tatterhood was thinking, what am I going to do with the calf's head? That when she took the head off of the calf moved. On that moment, all of those sleeping women in that house woke up and they came screaming out of there. Very quickly, Tatterhood put the head on their sister, told the men to row as fast as they could, and threw the head of the calf back, where it landed on one of the witches' heads, and she was never the same after that. They got in the boat and they sailed off. And Tatterhood said, okay, what do you want to do? We have 2 choices. We could go back to the life we lived before. We could go back to our mum and our dad. We could go back to normality. We could have a good life. Or we could take this boat, we could steal it, and we could go and have adventures. Now her sister, before the experience in the house, would have said, oh no, we've got to go home. But those 3 white strands of hair in her head meant that she was up for a little bit of adventure. And so she said, yeah, let's go, let's do it, let's steal Dad's boat and let's get out of here. And so they did. And there's so many stories about what they did. Some say that they spent 9 days on the top of the Yggdrasil tree. Some say that they were responsible for introducing bulb to Demeter. Some say that they spent 4 days and 4 nights in the Amazon researching what drugs went best with the ayahuasca. But little by little, they started weaving homewards again. They'd been gone a long time. There was only, in fact, 1 country that they hadn't visited. And so Tatterhood said, we might as well do this 1 country. It's the only one left. We might as well do it. And her sister says, yeah, why not? Now that one country had been hearing stories for years about Tatterhood and her sister with the 3 white hairs. And when they realized that Tatterhood was coming, they got very excited, especially all of the young girls, the young women. And so by the time Tatterhood and the sister with the 3 white hairs ship came into port, there were thousands of young girls lined up, all with a tattered hood on, all with a wooden spoon. And they were shouting, Tatterhood! 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 Now in that kingdom there was an old king. He wasn't that old. A king who was a widower, and he had a son. Now the son was a very beautiful young man. He was very handsome. Some say that he was a little bit like a cross between a young Johnny Depp and Jim Morrison, but that wouldn't be accurate enough. He was super good looking. He was so good looking that he was the only man in the whole world who could carry off leather trousers. He was amazing. He was tall, he was handsome, he was very quiet. He was one of those that everybody thought he was a poet. Everybody thought he was really deep because he didn't talk. Really, he didn't talk because there was nothing to say. He had nothing really going on inside of his head. He just looked really good. So he told his father that there was a whole horde of young women down at the quay waiting for some ship to come in. And his father decided, okay, we better go down and see who this is. So the father, the king, and his son, the prince, went down to meet the ship of Tatterhood and the sister with the 3 white hairs. And they got there, and here comes Tatterhood, waving her wooden spoon on her goat. And here comes this woman behind her with 3 white hairs in her head, 3 silver strands. And the king took one look at her, and he fell completely and unexplainably in love. He'd been mourning the passing of his wife for years and years and years. He thought that he would never get over her. And yet this woman arose out of the depths of the boat, and he saw her, and his heart was gone. He was joined with her in the most amazing, karmic, past life sort of way, completely and utterly in love with this woman. So Tatterhood came down, the sister came down, and the king and his son took them back to the castle. They gave them special rooms, they ordered a feast to be prepared. And so Tatterhood and her younger sister stayed there for days. The days became weeks, the weeks became months. And slowly, the sister began to fall in love with the king. One day, the king plucked up courage to ask Tatterhood for her sister's hand in marriage. And so he went down to Tatterhood and he said, can I talk to you for a little bit? And I have something that I have to say to you. And they went out. And Tatterhood listened. She liked the king. He was a really nice guy. And she thought she'd seen the way that her sister looked at him. And she thought they were a good match. And so she was all for it, except for one thing. And this is what she said to the king. In my culture, older sisters marry first. Oh, said the king, I didn't know you were older. Yeah, I'm older by about 5 seconds. So really, I should marry first. Oh, said the king, I'm sure we could find somebody to marry you. I'm sure, there's a lot of shepherds in the back country. There's, I have some, there's guys that work at the docks. There's a lot of, there's some bare knuckle boxers in town. I'm sure we could find one of them for you. I'm sure you would be really happy. And Tatterhood is like, no. I know who I want to marry. I know who I want to have. Well, who? Said the king. Oh, it's somebody in the court. He's quite quiet. He's very good looking, and he often wears leather trousers. It's him that I want to marry. And the king is thinking, and he's thinking of all his wise men, and he's thinking of his butlers, and he's thinking of anyone in the castle that sounds like that, and then he realizes it's his son. He's looking at Tatterhood. She's on a goat. She has a wooden spoon, and half of her face is covered. And he's thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to sell this woman to my son? How am I going to make him think that this is a good idea? He hasn't really spoken to me for a long time. I mean, he's my son and I love him, but he's on his own trip. He's doing his own thing. I don't know that he's ready for marriage or anything, but I do love her sister. And so he had a long talk and a long walk with his son. Son, you know that I loved your mother. Yeah, Dad, yeah, you loved her. Yeah, you really did. You loved her a lot. I know that. And son, that I've never really I've never played around. I've never had girlfriends. I've never done anything that was disrespectful, or I've never, I've had the opportunities, of course, but I've never done anything like that. No, Dad. No, no, no. You're a good man. You're a good man. And you know that I mourned your mother for years. I never, ever, ever thought I could replace her. I never, ever thought for a moment that I would find love again. Your mother's love and my love was so deep and pure, and you're really testimony to that love. Yeah, yeah, Dad. Yeah, I know that. I know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, son, I think I'm in love. I've fallen in love, and I found a woman that I would really like. She'll never be your mother, but I love her, and I think she loves me, and I think we could be happy together. And I really want to marry her. Oh, that's great, Dad. That's awesome. You go for it. Yeah, you do it. You go for it. You have I love you, Dad. You have my full blessing. Good, said the father. There's only one thing, this woman that I'm in love with, that I want to marry, has a sister, and she wants to marry you. And I can only marry the woman that I love if you marry her sister. Right. So your happiness relies on my answer, which was actually a really smart thing for this kid to say. Yeah, said the king. It does. It really does. Okay, said the boy, young man. Well, you've always done the right thing by me, Dad, and I really respect you and I admire you, and if this woman is as wonderful as you say she is, then surely it must run in the family, and I'll marry her sister. I'm happy for you. I'll do it, Dad. I'll do it. Great, said the king. And no sooner was those words out of his son's mouth than he went to the castle and he started preparing the feast. Now, because it was a royal wedding, because it was two royal weddings in the same wedding, the same ceremony, it required a special kind of priest. And it required a very small priest. A priest so small that they actually kept him in a matchbox. Now, this priest was really old, and he felt that he couldn't handle the ceremony alone. It was too big a thing for him to do. And so he decided that he needed to have a woman help him, a spiritual woman, a holy woman, special woman, help him with this ceremony. So huge it was. Two royal families combining twice. And so a special woman was sent for, and it turned out it was the same little doula that was kept in a matchbox in Norway. So when she came, and she came out of the little matchbox, and she saw the little priest come out of his little matchbox, they too fell immediately in love. Couldn't believe that all of this time had gone by without any romance for either of them. And here they were, completely and utterly in love in their own separate matchboxes. They immediately ordered one of those bigger matchboxes. And they decided that they would be a triple wedding. They would get married too. And so it was going to be a giant celebration. The king and the woman with the 3 silver strands, Tatterhood and the young prince, and the little priest and the little doula. So the procession was enormous. The priest and the doula were already at the ceremonial site. The king and the woman with the 3 silver strands were riding in front, and Tatterhood was riding behind. Tatterhood on her goat, the prince on his great horse, great big stallion. And Tatterhood was riding along beside him, and she's looking up at him, and she says to him, "You know what the problem with men is?" And the prince is looking down at her, and he thinks, "My God, we're not even married yet, and already she's complaining. This is ridiculous." And he's looking down at her, and he says, "No, I don't know what the problem with men is. I don't know that at all. I'm surprised that you're asking me that on our wedding day. That's a funny question." And Tatterhood looks up at him and she says, "I'm going to give you a gift for our wedding. This is my gift to you. I'm going to give you questions that you'll ask me." "Oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. All right, what's your first question? What should I ask you?" And Tatterhood looks up at him and she says, "Ask me why I'm always riding this goat." And the prince thought, fair enough, that's a really good question. I've often thought that. Why, Tatterhood, are you always riding that funny little goat?" And Tatterhood looks up at him and she says, "What goat? For those with the eyes to see, this is no goat." And he looks again, and really, he's no longer looking down, he's looking across, because Tatterhood is sitting on this magnificent mare, this chestnut brown mare with a long flowing tail and flowers in its mane, a golden bridle, beautiful big plush red velvet saddle, gorgeous horse. And the stallion that he's riding is really excited. super delighted to be riding alongside such a pretty mare. So now the prince is a little bit more interested. They're riding along, he's looking at her, waiting for the second question. She's riding along, not giving him the second question, waiting for him to just stop waiting. When she feels it's right, second question, why am I always carrying this wooden spoon? All right, says the prince, I'm in. Why are you always carrying that wooden spoon? For those with the eyes to see, this is not a wooden spoon. And so the prince looks in her hand, and sure enough, she's not carrying a wooden spoon, she's carrying a wand. It's a beautiful, twisted, rowan wand. A little bit of hawthorn in the handle, and an antler tip right at the edge of it. Seems to be quivering, bright, all of his own energy. Wow, it's a nice wand. Nice wand. Now he's intrigued. Okay, I'll give you the third question. Ask me why I'm always wearing this hood. Okay, says the prince. Tatterhood, why are you always wearing that hood that covers half your face? Why are you never take it off? I've never ever seen your face properly. Why are you wearing it? What tattered hood? For those with the eyes to see, I am not wearing a hood. And so he turns around and he looks at her, and he sees the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. She's wearing a circlet of flowers in her hair. Her hair is dark, it's cascading like a river down her back, spreading out over the saddle. She's wearing the most beautiful dress, very simple, just linen. Her face is shining, like a face that he feels that he's known all of his life, and always missed in his life, up until now, up until this point. And so they rode into the church. The king and the girl with the 3 white strands were married. Tatterhood and the prince were married, and the little doula and the little priest were married. And the celebration lasted a year and a day for each of the marriages. So a year and a day, plus a year and a day, plus a year and a day. The whole world celebrated that marriage. And at the wedding, there was a great eagle. And that eagle flew from the wedding when all of the cake was finished. Eagles love cake. It's not something that we know very much, but they really love cake. So once the cake was finished, the eagle left the wedding and it flew down into Europe. And there it met an osprey. And the osprey caught a ride on a boat that crossed the Atlantic and told the story to a vulture. And the vulture was one of the vultures that's been coming down here. And 2 days ago, that very vulture landed in a tree by the kitchen and told another vulture this story, which is why I'm able to tell it to you now. So in that story, there's old women that appear, and they appear at very important junctures in the story. There's the old woman in the woods, there's the doula, there's the women at the end of the fjord that turn her hair white. And so what I would love for you to do after we all finish scratching our ant bites is over the next 3 or 4 days, just think about that story again. Think about where you are in the story. What was it that caught you? What was it that drew your attention? What image spoke to you? Okay, thank you very much. And we're done.